and check out new cool places. So I'm curious where everybody's from tonight. If you want, put it in the chat. Let me know where you're from. I'm curious about your rig, what everybody's traveling in, and if you have any cool destinations or areas you're thinking about checking out in this coming year. So you can go ahead and put that in the chat and share it with everybody else as everybody gets in here and we get ready to go here in a few minutes. And I'm going to try and answer all your questions and hopefully do a good job. But if you still have questions, there's a Q&A you can see below where you can go ahead and put in any questions you have, and that's separate from chat. So questions go in Q&A, and then anything else you want to share, you can go in chat and the other attendees can see it. So we're going to go ahead and get started because you're here and I'm here, and I'm excited to plan some adventures with you here tonight. All right. So, as I said, I'm Adam. And if you see me out there on the trail, which I hope you do, I'm traveling in this truck camper. I travel around with my wife, Val, who you can see there in the photo. And I love traveling with other people. I think there's almost nothing cooler than being in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of desolation with some friends. So, I hope this helps you to plan a cool multi-day trip. And maybe you get to invite some new or existing friends to come on your trip as well. And I also really geek out. I like to 3D print stuff, and so I make some of my own 3D parts and gear as I travel. And so that's just part of the adventure for me. It's a big part of my life, and onX really helps me to get out there. So if you want to learn any more about me after the session, I'm Bantha Overland. We're really trying to help more people get out there. You can find me and Val at Bantha Overland or on our website, banthaoverland.com. But we're going to get into it. So, I haven't always been an onX user, but I am a super passionate onX user these days. And one of the big reasons is this, right? There's over 650,000 miles of off-road trails. I hope you've had a chance to discover some of them. And I think the thing is, like, once you try a few, you get hooked, right? And you want to do more and more and more. And so that's really what we're going to talk about tonight. How do you make big, awesome trips out of those trails? And the thing I didn't know originally, which is probably like the number one thing about onX, I tell everybody, right? There's almost 16,000 guided trails. It's growing, every day. Trail guides are out there adding new trails, and it's all those descriptions and photos and difficulty ratings. We're going to look at some of that tonight. But how do you really pick the right trail for you? Because in some respects, there's just too many choices. And so I'm going to tell you about some of my experience using onX to find the perfect trail and put a few of those together for a cool trip. So tonight, we're going to start with picking an area to explore. We're going to look at some layers, and there's some new layers in onX, so you might not have seen some of these layers. So I'm excited to share them with you if you haven't seen them, and figure out like where do we want to go? East, west, north, south, what area do we want to play in, right? And then how do we find and select and save those trails? How do we organize it and share it if we're traveling with some friends? And how do we navigate along the way? So onX recently released on and off-road navigation, which is super cool. And it actually saved my butt. I was in the middle of this 80-mile trail, and the trail was obstructed, right? And I didn't have a great alternate plan. We're going to talk about alternate plans tonight too. But onX, I said, hey, get me back to pavement. And 20 miles later, I found a way out. So off-road navigation is super cool. And then we have a really cool giveaway. So stick around. We're going to be giving away a couple prizes to attendees tonight, and I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a really fun piece of kit that you can take with you on your trips. Okay, so stories. So, tonight we're going to talk about going to a really cool place, the San Rafael Swell. I hope you've been there. It's about an hour west of Moab. If you haven't, maybe this is an idea for a trip. But I took a trip there last year with some friends, and we're actually about to go back in a couple weeks. And so I thought, hey, I got to do this masterclass. Why don't we just plan my trip with everybody else, and I'll show you how I do it. And so we're going to revisit this place we went last year. It's really cool. This is a cool shot up car at a uranium mine. Perfect place to play with the kids and the dogs. The friends I travel with have kids and dogs, and we do play at uranium mines. Um, these are the friends I travel with. This is a picture at the Wedge. If you haven't been there, the little Grand Canyon in the swell, it's beautiful, right? And we got stuck. We got a little muddy. We had a fondue. I definitely recommend a trail fondue. And this is why we travel, right? Like the stories, the fun, the adventure, right? And so onX is a big part of that. And I want to share how I use onX to find those kind of places and to get those stories and to have those fun memories with the people I like traveling with. So I'm in here in onX. I'm going to start here in web. I often plan on web when I get started. I have a big monitor. It's where I sort of dream and plan what I'm going to do. And then I'm also going to bring in my phone here, and we're going to look at the phone too. So anything you can do on web, you can do on mobile. Anything you can do on mobile, you can do on web. I'll show you a few differences, but for the most part, they're similar, and I'll try and show a little bit of each. So I'm based here in Denver, and if you know anything about folks that live in Colorado, they always think that they should go to the desert in the spring and the fall. It's sort of like, when you're tired of too much snow or it's just mud season in the mountains, folks go out in the desert. And so I I'm gonna talk about planning a trip here in the San Rafael Swell, and I'll show you how I really, pick areas like this. So one thing I definitely look at when I'm picking an area is thinking about the time of year, right? And so onX is great at showing us, different kind of land ownership. This dark green, if we click on it, it's going to tell us that it's some kind of national forest, right? And forests are normally, for the most part, snowy in the winter. I'm taking a trip in a couple weeks in February, and so I'm probably looking a little bit more for desert. And so over here, this yellow area, if you click on it, you'll find that most of it is BLM, right? And so BLM land is often desert kind of land. It can be a little bit easier to disperse camp on, which we'll actually talk about in the next advanced masterclass next month. So if you're interested in that, sign up for the March just camping masterclass. Um, but yeah, so I'm often looking for, public lands because that's where I can camp and that's where I can off-road. And that's why I call myself an overlander. I always joke that overlanding to me at least just means I really love off-roading and I really love dispersed camping. Um, and so that's one of the first things I look for when I'm looking for an area, what area has a lot of public land, right? And then another thing I might start to look at is like, what's the weather going to be like? So one of the new layers in onX is temperature. So if you come in here, I'll show you that again, activity, and then come down here to temperature. And then if you want, you can hit layer details and you'll see the temperature. So yellow, orange, red, that's sort of the warmer temperatures, green, right? And so right now, if we're looking out here in the desert area, the Moab area, the San Rafael Swell area, you'll see it's sort of yellow. So right now it's sort of in the 60s or 70s and it's probably getting warmer. And so I love to use this as a way to sort of say like, hey, am I going to the right spot? Or, am I going up here to Montana where it's super cold, right? And so that's one thing I look at, and a layer I really like. Another thing I will often look at, and this is less pronounced right now, but there are these awesome air quality layers that were added to onX recently. And so you can see if there's forest fires or other things that are happening that may be impeding your kind of trip. So again, I'm looking in this area, I see a little bit of, and I'll zoom out here a little bit more. I see, there's a few fires, there's a little bit of smoke, but nothing like you might see in the summer. And so I feel like if I'm planning a trip in the next week or two, nothing big going on, I'll probably check back on this a little bit before the trip and see if I need to adjust. But that's always super helpful. And then probably the the number one thing I always check when I'm thinking about an area when I'm like, let's go to the desert, right? Is there going to be snow? Some people off-road in the snow. I'm not a big snow off-roader, and so I like to come down here to the base maps and switch to the satellite map. And then if you turn on recent imagery, you'll sort of see where there's snow, right? So we can see over here to the west of this desert area, there's some snow. And if we come back into Colorado, there's some snow. And so when I'm thinking about an area, if I'm saying, hey, let's go over here to Moab, right, in this area, or I'm thinking, hey, let's go over to the San Rafael Swell, I'm looking for snow. And so if I zoom in a little bit, I don't really see any snow, but I did check this before the class, and I want to show you in November and December, there actually was snow. So there's this recent imagery control at the bottom, and you can go back through time and you can see the changes. And so if we go back to late November, early December, there's a ton of snow here, right? And so that's probably the biggest things I look for, right? Is there snow on the ground? What's the temperature? Are there wildfires? And so, when I'm thinking of an area to play in, those are the things I normally check out before I sort of start zooming in and looking at trails and activities and camping and stuff like that. So that's a cool little feature. As you can see, if we come back to sort of more recent, right? Doesn't look like a lot of snow. Again, if the trip's in a couple weeks, I might watch the weather and check in on it. But looks like we're pretty good to go. And then one other cool thing that recently got added, because sometimes my friends, like we're planning a 5-day trip for the trip that's coming up in a few weeks. And sometimes my friends say, "Well, I can go for 5 days, but I gotta do this one meeting, right? Or I gotta do these couple meetings." And so there are cell phone coverage layers now here at the bottom of the layers. And so I have Verizon, so I'm going to turn on the Verizon layer and I'll go into the layer details, but you can guess, right? Like the more red it is, the more coverage or the more bandwidth potential. And if there's no color or lighter color, less chance of coverage. And so again, if I'm looking at this area, this San Rafael Swell area, you can sort of see that there's some coverage and there's not some coverage. And so for example, this is a place we dispersed camp on our last trip here last year, and this is that little Grand Canyon I was showing you. You can see it. It probably has pretty okay coverage, right? So we might want to plan, when we're picking routes, we might want to say like, "Hey, my friend needs to take a meeting on Thursday or Friday. Let's start the trip over there, and then let's go into the more remote areas that don't have coverage." So that's a pretty cool layer. And if you have other providers, you can come in here for AT&T, come in here for T-Mobile, and and of course, your results will vary. I carry a Starlink. I like my Starlink Mini a lot, but it's a very helpful new feature. I know a lot of people are on the road full time, or they need to mix work and play, and so it can be, helpful to look at this information and sort of, see is my route going through an area that's going to have very little cell coverage. This route we did last year had a lot of coverage in the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and then not a lot towards the end. So, all right. So that's sort of areas, right? So that's how I sort of validate like the San Rafael swell looks good, even though it's only mid-February. Not a lot of snow, no fires. Let's dive in and look at some of the trails. So something that often happens to me, I hope it happens to you, is people will say, "Hey, you should check out this trail. There's this cool trail." And so someone recently told me about the Red Canyon Loop. And so I'm going to search for it. And let's see if that's it. So here it is. There's this Red Canyons loop. And I'm going to show this to you on my phone so we can get a little phone action in. And so, the first thing I'm often doing when I'm looking for a new trail is trying to figure out the difficulty of the trail, right? And so, some people like really hard trails. Some people like really easy trails. There's not really a right answer. It just depends what you like. But, I'll start to look at the general area and say like, okay, I see green trails. I see blue trails. I even see a red trail here, right over here at 5 miles of hell. And so some of those trails might apply to you and some of those trails might not apply to you. And I'm going to show you sort of how I go through and filter out some of that information. So we'll come back to Red's Canyon here in a second, but let's go up to this trail here called the Wickup Loop. So the Wickup Loop is a guided trail, right? A trail guide has gone out, run the trail, provided information about how easy or hard it is. And so it has a distance, it has elevation, it's rated 2 out of 10, and it took this person an hour and 30 minutes to run. Someone suggested spring, summer, fall, and it was Ryan. So thanks, Ryan. There's a description, which I always read, just talks about what's going on. Nothing seems crazy here. Looks like it might be sort of pretty, some nice things going on. I look at the photos, so that gives me a good sense of like what the road surface is like. Looks like there's small shelves, some rocks, maybe some width issues, right? Little off camber. This is perfect for me and my friends. I like stuff like this. So I go through some of those photos. I like that there's tall rocks. Like my friends like some scenery. And the thing, some people are like, "Oh, don't you just like not want to know?" Like, a couple photos is not going to give away the trail. So I think this is just enough to decide if it's for me. And I come down here to the difficulty rating, and I can read it, and it says, dirt or rocky road, maybe small water crossings or obstacles under 12 inches. And if you ever, are wondering what these difficulty ratings are, you can always come over here and come into the details, right? So in my rig, in my truck camper, which is 11,000 pounds, I do not do tens. I do not do nines. My friends and I are sort of one through fivers. We know that based on experience running some other trails in onX. I'm sure you have started to know what kind of trail difficulty you like by trying some of the guided trails on onX. And so often, what I will do when I come into a new area like this San Rafael Swell area is I'll just sort of one look at like what are most of the trails, right? So I can see greens and blues with a few blacks and a few reds, right? And so I get a sense that like that's probably the range of a lot of these trails. I will also then filter the map to sort of get rid of trails I don't care about. So again, if you come into up here in the upper left, activity, and down here where we had our map layers above that, there's some filters, right? And so you can say, hey, I'm a full width vehicle. I have an F350, so it's a big truck. It is high clearance, so I'm going to select that. And then difficulty, I like easy trails and I like moderate trails, right? So easy is sort of that 1 to 3, moderate is, the next chunk of trails. And so I come in and sort of filter the map and say, okay, these are probably the trails I'm most interested in. And then I start to sort of look in there and try and make a plan. So one useful thing can be this discover view. You can click here on the left to get to it if you're not already in there and you can just hover over these different options on web and you can sort of see right now Sinbad is down here. You'll see it sort of highlight it when I hover over it. The Wickup loop is just above it. It's over here. And it's just nice. You get a photo, you get the distance, you get the difficulty. And so I often will come in here and just start like pouring over these trails and saying, well, the Wickup loop look cool. I see this other green near it. This is a 3. If I come in here and look at some of the photos, some cool scenery. Looks like the trail might go through a wash, which is sort of cool, as long as it's not raining. Um, and so that's cool, right? And so one of the things I start doing, and you can do your own thing, but I start sort of marking these things that are of interest to me. So if I thought the Wake Up Loop was interesting, I might come in here and add a little Jeep icon and make it purple. And this is just a reminder to me that I thought the Wake Up Loop was cool, right? And then I might come in here and I might say like this cane wash also looked cool, right? I might give it a name, do that icon. Now, one thing I do, I'll show you because I sort of do this as I'm going. I like to just stay organized from the beginning. And so I always create a folder for each trip and I name it the year. That is not this year. This is this year. And then I think we're probably going to go February. So we're going to call it Swell Part 2 because I took a trip last year. We want to go back and do some trails we haven't done. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And so now this Cane Wash waypoint is in that folder, right? And I'm actually, whoops, I got to hit save. I'm going to go back to this other one. And I forgot to give it a name. I'm going to call this the Wickup Loop, right? And I might say, looks like some cool rocks and maybe a hike for the kids, right? So I'm gonna add that information, and then I'm also gonna add it to that folder. And so we'll come back to how that folder helps with sharing and focusing and navigating and all that kind of stuff. But I generally come through and I look at these trails and I see, what seems possible, what seems not possible. I might, say, hey, I could maybe connect these trails, right? Because one of the things it's a little, you probably didn't notice it, but this Reds Canyon loop that I looked up before, it's down here. And I had put a waypoint in a long time ago saying like, hey, someone told me about the Red Canyons loop. So I'm trying to figure out like maybe I could start up here where I started last year on this blue route, right? This is where I started my trip last year. Maybe you could come in, have a nice camp at a place I know everybody could have a good first night, and then we can have 4 days of cool adventure ahead of us on this trip. And then I have this cane wash that looks cool, this wick up loop that looks cool, right? And I could come down and maybe connect Fix-It Pass and even this Sinbad Valley and sort of work my way down to this thing someone told me about. And so we'll look at the Sinbad Valley one as well. Now you can see trail reports. So again, this has been there for a little bit, but hopefully you're adding these and hopefully you're reading these. But every onX user can come in and put in trail reports and sort of say what the condition was on the trail. It's super awesome because conditions can change. And so I encourage you to read them when you're planning a trip. I also encourage you to add them, when you're out there on the trail. And so, one interesting thing about this trail, and this is why, again, like it's so cool to have guided trails, is it's like there's there's a tunnel, right? And so that may matter for your vehicle. This is actually my vehicle here, in the tunnel, and so we took some photos and added some height descriptions to it. But this is the kind of thing where like if this were just a line on a map, you would never have this information. And so whether you're a trail guide or you're adding these trail reports, just a super helpful way to support other people so they know what's going on and they can plan their trips. So one thing I might do though, I might actually add a waypoint in here and sort of, I use red for sort of danger, I suppose. And so I might come in here and just sort of pick the stop sign. And I might add this to my folder. Right, and I just may say double check height, right? And so it's just a reminder to me and other people I might be planning with that there might be an obstacle. And one of the cool things about onX, I don't know if you've ever dug into, all of the details. I'll name this tunnel real quick, is, there's just a bunch of kind of hazard icons. And so if you need to add like trail difficulty or rock obstacle or rock crawl or just, ruts or any kind of thing like that, you can come in and mark that. Um, Whether that's something you're doing in advance for planning or you find it, on the trail. Um, all right. So I'm gonna pull up my phone here real quick, and I'm gonna the question I now have, like I've marked some potential things I want to check out. I'm starting to like grab the puzzle pieces. I think I'm now curious about this Reds Canyon Wilderness, right? So here we're encountering something different, right? It's not a guided trail, right? If I click on it on my mobile app, it says Red Canyons Loop. It has some basic information. It looks like it's open all year. The surface says it's sand. I don't really know, right? And so um, I love guided trails, but I also like just trying stuff that has less information and seeing if we make it, right? We can always turn around, hopefully, or help each other recover. But sometimes the adventure is not knowing and trying something new. And so, how might I use onX to see, like, is this even something I should attempt? I think that's the question. And I want to show you how I do that. So, here on mobile, one thing I do is I probably would zoom in and start to look at some of the topography. So you can see, like, there are some cliffs or some kind of elevation changes over here, but the road looks like it sort of skirts the edge of it. So that's one good thing. Now, another thing I might do is I might tilt. So on a phone, you can use two fingers to do this, or you can open up the sort of the base map icon where it says topo in the lower right, and you can switch to 3D. So I'm gonna hit 3D. And now that I'm in 3D, I'm using two fingers. So to show you this, two fingers, like up and down, two fingers. And I can adjust the tilt of the map, right? And so I can turn back and I can sort of see this Red Canyons loop here. I can say, okay, that looks cool. And then I see these rock formations, and that looks sort of cool. So it looks cool if I can do it. So now I'm going to turn on hybrid. So hybrid is a combination of satellite and topo lines to help me with elevation, right? And I start to see more of it. And I think those topo lines are getting in the way. So I'm actually going to just switch to satellite. All right. So that looks super cool. Like I totally want to drive that, right? And I can also see there's this other road up here. There's a blue that looks a little harder. Um, So I'll often do this and I'll get right in there, right? I'll just sort of zoom all the way in, right? And I'll look and I'll see, well, it looks like this is in a wash potentially. because you can sort of see where there's been flow and it looks like it's crossing a wash. But anyway, this gives me a sense that like, I could look all along here, but nothing here looks super crazy. It looks like it's probably really pretty. It looks like it's probably really desolate. But it also looks like it's probably very doable. And so even though there's not a ton of information about this trail, I think it's something I might try, right? And so I also do that, right? I pick a mix of guided trails and non-guided trails. So I have this, I already have this waypoint down here for the Red Canyon Loop, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to my folder too. All right. So you might be wondering about other things like camping, things like that. We are going to cover camping. We're just going to do it in the next masterclass. So if you are interested in that, please come back for March. We're going to get so into dispersed camping. But this is all about routes tonight. And so, one thing I might do here, since this isn't a guided trail, is I might actually paint a route on it so that I actually have a route I can see a little bit more visibly and know when I'm on the ground, right? Sometimes it's not as clear as it looks on the map, right? There's all these forks, there's all these possibilities. And so I'm going to make a route using the build route tool up here in the upper right. So I'm going to grab that tool and I'm going to start probably here because this blue route is somewhere I've driven before. So I think I can get there. And then I'm just going to come along the edge of this and it should just sort of snap, right? So it's sort of following this. Right? And then at any point, if you want, you can certainly just, click and add a point. So like for example, if we wanted to maybe come down to this thing called Cowboy Camp, we could click down to there. And then I might just try and finish the loop and go around back to the beginning. Right about there. Yep. I'll give this a name and I'll put this in my folder. Swell part two. Now, one cool thing you get, right, by doing this, and we'll talk about more fuel range and gas here in a second, you get the distance, right? So this is 35 miles, right? So one thing that's different about multi-day trips is really figuring out, well, how long are my supplies going to last? How long is fuel going to last? How long are food supplies going to last? Things like that. And so I generally do that after I sort of have a rough plan. And so we're going to get to it in a minute, but um, you can sort of see how this is going to come together a little bit to help us figure that out. All right, so now I have this route here, and I have my waypoint to sort of say, I think this one's interesting. I also have these other two, and so let's just sort of go through that gas example. So, my last trip, I had pinned some gas stations here. You can see these white icons that have gas in various towns. You could also come in here, if you wanted to like say, hey, what gas is there in this area? Gas is one of the things you can search for. So, like, looks like in Green River, there's a gas station, right? I happen to know there's a few, but there's definitely a gas station over there. So, you could mark another gas station. We'll go ahead and put that in the folder. And so we're starting to build up, this list of trails, this list of gas stations, things we might do over the course of a couple days. And so at this point, one of the things I often do is I'll draw like a big route that represents the entire trip to try and understand how many miles it is, and then think about like how many miles do we want to drive in a day? How might we want to break that up into different nights, find different camps, and then also fuel, right? So for my vehicle, it's a gas guzzler, and so I need to be fuel conscious. And so I also travel with folks that might have a range of 240 miles, 260 miles, things like that. And so let's look at that example a little bit. So now that I have some areas that I might travel, I'm going to make another route. So we'll just make this one yellow, just so it's easy to see. And I'm going to start it up here, sort of near where I think we're going to start the trip at this gas station in, let's see what this town is. I think it's Castledale. Yep. And so I think we're going to come down here. We're going to camp at this place we camped at before. So I'm just going to roughly draw it to there. And then I think we're going to come down that route that we used last year. That's here in blue. And then we're going to do this cane wash. So sometimes if it's not snapping or there's a bunch of different routes, you might need to sort of help it along and say like, no, 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 I want to go over here. So I think we're going to do that. Then I think we're going to try and come down here. All right. Hopefully we can fit through the tunnel. So there is a chance that, someone might not fit through that tunnel. So we'll talk about alternate plans in a second. But so I might come down, right? And then I might do my loop here in the pink. So we're going to do that. And so you can see over here, we're about 75 miles. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to keep coming around this loop. Keep coming around this loop. And then let's see what the closest gas station I have marked. So looks like it's probably going to be this one over here we just added in Green River. So let's just sort of roughly add that. Okay. So we'll say full route. And I'm just going to give this a dashed line. Maybe I'll make it blue so we can see it a little bit better. Give it a dashed line, and that way we sort of know it's a little bit different. And then I'm going to add that to my folder as well. And so it's 154 miles, right? And so for each participant that I'm going out with, we might have a discussion about gas range. Now, I think everybody can probably do 150 miles, but we may want to explore more, or something may happen, right, where we need to take an alternate route. And so I think it's useful to think about, if your max fuel range is 250 miles and the trip's going to be 240, you might want to have some extra gas or make sure someone in your party has some extra gas. So I'll often do something like that. Now, one thing that's cool, you can come in here to your routes. So I just on the left did my content. I went to routes. If you don't want to see this all the time, you can just hide it on the map, right? So often I'll draw stuff like that and then I'll hide it. Another cool thing you can do is you can come in here and just say like, hey, hide everything on my map, right? And then just show me swell part two, right? So I love to do that. It's sort of like a focus mode. Often when I'm out there on the trail traveling, I will do it just like that. And then that way I can sort of just look at that trip without all of the other stuff I've done in the past and get confused. So that's a little trick. I enjoy it. One super important thing, right, before we talk about sharing, before we talk about going on the trip, before I show you a cool demo of off-road navigation, offline maps, right? So I know we looked at the cell phone layer and I know there might be data. I always download my maps at home or when I have a Starlink. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a new offline map. So actually, let's switch back to our phone, because you can do it on either device, but let's do it on our phones just because we haven't been spending a ton of time there. So I'm going to zoom out and we got my map right here. And so I'm going to make a new map and you can see I get this box, right? And I am going to pick sort of an area to put in the box. Now, one thing to know, low, medium, high. I think there's lots of questions about what size, map download do I need. One cool thing to know is I'll just cancel out of this for 1 second to show you this. You're always going to get the topo map. So whatever resolution you pick, you're going to get a good topo map. You're going to get the guided trails. You're going to get the line colors. You're always going to have that. And I think that's very serviceable, right? You can still see some terrain on here. You can still see the cane wash. You can still, see all sorts of details. What you're really picking when you pick the resolution for offline maps is this satellite imagery, right? So if you want to be able to zoom all the way in here and be like, that's a cool looking tree, you probably need the highest amount of imagery, right? If you're okay with like being a little further out, right, and it getting a little fuzzy when you zoom in, you don't necessarily need that high, right? And so when I'm making an offline map, I think about what I'm doing. If I'm just driving in an area, it's not super technical. I'm not hiking. I'm not trying to find a very specific thing. Often I will just choose probably medium, honestly. And if I have to do a couple maps, I'll do it. But I'll just show you, I would probably make a northern map like this, right? And I'd call it Swell North. I, I swear, spelling on demos is very challenging. Okay, and then I might add one more. That was sort of the southern part of this trip, right? And I might call this Swell South, right? And then I save it. And then before I left home, I download it. Now you can see these are already downloading. I'm on a high-speed connection. Um, yes, I'm enjoying it. It goes pretty fast, right? If you have a broadband connection at home, it goes pretty fast on a Starlink too. Um, but yeah, I find this super reliable. And then as soon as this one goes green, we get the check mark here, we're good to go, right? Like these are solid, they're offline. We have the data we need when we're traveling. And if you really, really, really want to check it out, you can even hit go offline there, the button, and you can preview it and see, what you think of it. All right, so we've covered a lot of the things there. One other thing I want to show you. So this is me sort of getting ready to get out there, go on the trip, or maybe just propose it to my friends. I'm often the one suggesting some ideas. So I'm going to come in here in my mobile app to my content. So this is where your folders are. And so I'm going to come into my folders and I'm going to find my swell trip. Let's see if I see it here. Yep. So you can share individual routes, you can share individual waypoints. In this particular case, I'm just going to share the folder. It's easy that way. If I add other stuff to the folder, it'll just be there. I don't have to reshare it. And so you can see this little share button in the lower corner down here. So I'm going to hit share. And so some of you might be in this beta. It's going to be available for everyone soon, but there's this cool new thing. I'm very excited about it called contribute folders. And this lets everybody that the folder is shared with contribute to it. So I can add a route, you can add a route, our friend can add a waypoint. It's a very collaborative way to plan trips, and I think it's super cool. So available in beta for some people, available to everyone later this year. But if you go ahead and share that, you can get a share link, and then you can just text that to people. You can email that to people. And when they get that link and they join and they log in with their onX account, they'll be part of the folder and you'll be able to see, Franklin's part of this trip and Val's part of this trip, and everybody can collaborate on it. So I love that. It's an easy way to share, make sure everyone's on the same page. So, they get that folder, they save their offline maps, and that's really everything you need to you're out there in the field. So I know it's been a ton. I want to pause there and show you a quick demo of navigation. And rather than try and fake it, I went out to my vehicle and I recorded a little demo. And I just want to sort of show you the power of on-road and off-road navigation and how you can use it on your phone or on your vehicle if you have CarPlay or Android Auto. Using Apple Maps or Google Maps. So one of the cool things you can do in the app is if you know you want to start your trip, you can pull up that waypoints or routes and you can hit navigate. And in the past, you've been able to navigate using Apple Maps or Google Maps, but there's a new option for onX navigation. And if you select that, it'll give you turn-by-turn directions on road and off road, which is really cool because a lot of mapping services do not work very well when you get off road as well. And so if I wanted to go ahead and follow this route, I'd hit go. On Harmon Way, then turn right onto West 76th Avenue. And so you can hear the prompts. And so you can zoom in, you can zoom out. If you pop this up, you can look at the detailed directions if you need to see that. And then you can also preview the route. And then you can always also sort of switch between your heads up, zoomed in view and the total route view like this. And then you can also switch your orientation. So if you want your direction facing north versus north facing north, you can do that. You can toggle the sound on and off. And so you get your written instruction and you get your audio instruction. And so if you just have a phone, you can go ahead and use your phone. It also works in landscape, which is nice. I happen to have CarPlay. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like here on CarPlay. And I'll drive around a little bit so we can see this in action. In less than half a mile, turn right onto Sheridan Boulevard. One thing I like to do sometimes too, like if I'm passing a trailhead or a campsite I might want to check out later, I'll use this mark button, and you can use it to either start recording a track or mark my location. So I'm going to mark my location, and you'll see it drops a waypoint right there, and it just makes it really easy for me to go back later in the app, and I can update it and say it was a campsite or whatever. But a lot of times that's how I mark my campsites because I just find cool campsites as I drive by it, or maybe a trailhead I want to visit the next day.
Onto West 74th Place, then turn left onto Kendall Street.
All right, so that is on-road and off-road navigation. Now, I want to show you, I said at the beginning of the session, I was in a little bit of a pickle and it saved my butt, and I want to show you where I was. So I was up in the Red Desert of Wyoming, that's Southwest Wyoming, if you've ever been there. Highly suggested. It's a cool area. And I was, um, let me just change my filters so we can see it here. Oh, there it is. Spaghetti. That's what people call this. So I was like somewhere in the middle of this spaghetti mess, and I was 80 miles from pavement, and there was just a snowbank. I tried to go through it. I sank. I had to recover myself, and I was like 20 miles from this road, 28, and I was in the onX navigation beta, and I hit the navigate button, and it found a route through all of the spaghetti, and it got me out, and I was so happy. And so I think it's super cool. I use navigation for getting to the trailhead. I use navigation to get myself out of sticky situations like that. And there's some enhancements coming to navigation where you also have a lot more granularity to pick, if you want to start on one side of a trail or a different side of a trail or run a trail or stuff like that. So definitely check it out. I'm curious what you think about it, but I thought it was a little crazy at first. I was like, why do I need that? And then I actually got stuck and it saved my butt. And it was super cool. So, yeah, check that out on your device and see if you find that helpful as well. All right, so that's a little bit of insight into how I plan my multi-day routes. A big part of how I do that is camping, so we'll cover that in the March Advanced Masterclass. But yeah, I hope you found something helpful in there that'll help you get out there on another adventure, hopefully sometime this year. If you have any other questions, put them in the Q&A. I see lots of activity on there, so hopefully lots of you have got your questions answered. Now, let's turn it to the giveaway. So here's how this works. If you attended tonight and you have an onX account, you need to have an onX account. So if you don't, there's a link in the chat where you can register. But tomorrow we're going to pick 5 winners, and drum roll, those winners are going to get this lovely onX field hat. So I love this thing. It keeps the sun off your face and off your neck. And it's a great hat. There's a little strap. I don't normally use the strap too much. I sort of pull it around the back, but if you want to look cool, you pull it around the front. So yeah, thank you for being here. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you for the next onX Advanced Masterclass. And if you want a hat, I hope to see you out there in it in the field. That's it for now.